On the evening of May 10th, 2023, President Donald J. Trump agreed to appear in a town hall on CNN, hosted by an incompetent fool named Caitlyn Collins. Caitlyn was disrespectful and nasty to President Trump.
You're a nasty person.
She interrupted him all night with disinformation and outright lies.
What's happening to our country right
You built
now?
about 52 miles of new wall when you were in office, Mr. President.
Effectively turning a town hall into a live debate. Very few people have ever debated Donald Trump and lived to tell about it. The next morning, Caitlyn Collins was picked up on a roadside, blood-caked and screaming murder. The girl babbled a mad tale, then she sank into catatonia. The events of that evening are now known in the annals of American history as the CNN Town Hall Massacre.
Shout out to the Dilly meme team, man. I came across that as I was putting this video together and thought it was absolutely hilarious. And no, I'm not calling for any massacre of anybody, okay? That was literally a joke that I came across as I was putting this all together. But big shout out to the Dilly meme team, man. They are always hilarious with these types of videos, and I'm sure you guys are really familiar with the Dilly meme team. I've posted several of their videos in the past. They always do a fantastic job. Absolutely. So, once again, shout out to the Dilly meme team. But obviously, we got to talk about Caitlyn Collins today because she once again got owned straight to her face. Uncle Trump met with Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador. And, of course, Caitlyn Collins was there, and she had to get in some type of, question, okay? But I also want to show you guys who Caitlyn Collins used to be, okay? As some of you may know, Caitlyn Collins has been involved in media for quite some time now, and she didn't always work for CNN. And it's quite interesting when you see the difference in who she was versus who she is now. And here's one clip. Check it out.
From our nation's capital. Caitlyn, what does that mean? What's George Soros trying to do with the immigration crisis?
Good morning. Okay, so George Soros is this foreign-born left-wing guy who essentially wants to change the nature of our country. And in this data dump, one of the memos was about the refugee crisis. And they made 3 points. They think that they've been successful at influencing immigration policy across the world. They think that the refugee crisis is an opportunity to continue doing so. And they think the refugee crisis is the new normal. And George Soros is this guy who is a staunch advocate for open borders. He wants people to be able to go wherever they want, whenever they want, for whatever reason. And for him, he sees this immigration policy, this crisis, as a vehicle to further his immigration agenda.
From our nation's capital. Caitlyn, what does...
Yeah, so you heard Caitlyn Collins there, who called George Soros a left-wing and was calling him out on, what he kind of does behind the scenes. Let's check out who Caitlyn Collins is today, because it's quite interesting. Just switching networks, right? Getting a different check completely changes who you are. Quite interesting. Let's dive in.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs. If they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So will you return him, President
And
Bukele?
you are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
But Stephen Miller, wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant, because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As 2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan to ask for anyone to get him back?
And
that-
what was the ruling
that your
in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked
¿Usted lo
President
liberaría,
Bukele,
Presidente
what is
Bukele?
can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how
CNN.
can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, I mean, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into our
I mean, there's
So
a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you
Facts.
said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility. Please go ahead.
President Trump, thank you very much. How many?
I know that was a bit long-winded, but I wanted to play the whole thing because I love the way Trump's cabinet is now. They genuinely have his back, right? It isn't a bunch of rhinos and fake wannabes. And I know some people might say Mark Rubio, but it seems like Mark Rubio has completely turned around from who he used to be. As you saw there, I mean, even he stepped up and was like, no, bro. I mean, this is really quite simple. Trump is right. Okay? End of story. End of discussion. Why do we keep talking about this? This is nonsense. But of course, you know, Caitlyn Collins and her propagandists, okay, she has to keep attempting to drive a point that isn't true. It's not true at all. Even CNN, Caitlyn's own network, went live on air and admitted Trump is actually right. Check it out.
And President Trump and President Bukele made it clear that Abrego Garcia will not be returned to the United States, despite this U.S. Supreme Court ruling saying that Trump had to facilitate his return. So are they just ignoring a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, or is the fact that the ruling was so mushy, in your words,
yes,
giving him an opening?
It's a technical term I learned in law school, Jake. Mushy, look, they're working within the ambiguity that the Supreme Court justices gave them. They did not order the administration to return him to the United States. They said that they need to facilitate this return. They could have said, we order him returned, but they didn't do that. So you heard the Attorney General. She was being very careful in the Oval Office. When she was asked, you know, would you help? She says, of course we'd provide a plane, right? Thereby facilitating whatever El Salvador is doing. The Supreme Court appeared to defer to the executive branch, given that this is an international matter. And you see, yes, it does look a little bit like a semantic game, but they are playing within the bounds of what the Supreme Court ruled. So no, they are not defying this order.
Boom. Her own network came on and said, no, he's actually right. They're not defying order. They're playing within the bounds of what the Supreme Court has allowed. Now, I don't know if the Supreme Court did that on purpose. I would assume Uncle Clarence actually did that on purpose. You know, he understands. He's not a dumb guy. He's a very intelligent guy, even though the left would like to bash him and say all types of crazy things. Even, you know, I'm not about to get in on that rant. But, yeah, man, listen. This whole Caitlyn Collins thing is just so annoying. Does she annoy the rest of y'all too? Like, is it just me that's just like really getting annoyed by Caitlyn Collins? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. But like, I just get so annoyed hearing this chick talk, especially knowing like who she used to be. Like, you can literally take a check and completely flip just for the check. Like, literally, this is Caitlyn Collins. That's Caitlyn. It's crazy.
What does that mean? What's George Soros trying to do with the immigration crisis?
Good morning. Okay, so George Soros is this foreign-born left-wing guy who...
Like, that's the same chick. And all it took was a check. All it took was a check, right? Switching networks, receiving a check from somebody different, and now she is the way that she is. Crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Anyway, thanks for tuning in as always. Y'all let me know your thoughts and your opinions on all of this. I'm happy that Trump actually has a cabinet of people, a team of people that truly have his back, that know what they're doing, that understand the ins and outs of everything. So there's no gotcha moments, right? Because, you know, the left would love to get Trump or his team in a gotcha moment. You know, they would air that 24/7, 365 if they could. You know, it's why they're running this story as if Trump is defying the court. In reality, he's not defying the court at all. He's actually playing within the bounds that the court allowed him to play within, and they know this. But of course, they're going to keep pushing this narrative, like you just heard Caitlyn Collins do, this fake narrative, fake news, right? Which Trump coined that term and made that famous, fake news, which is what Caitlyn Collins was obviously doing there. She knows the truth. She knows what's really happening, and that what she's saying is complete bogus. Even her own network had to come out and admit that it was actually bogus, which I'm shocked about. You know, I was surprised to come across the clip of CNN admitting that, no, Trump is actually right. You know, like, he's telling the truth. Like, he did what he's allowed to do. But anyway, stay safe out there. Peace and love. I'm out.